Carson City Audit Committee. Could we take the roll call?
Chairperson Bertrand.
Here.
Vice Chairperson Prowse.
Here.
Member Bagwell. Here. Member Leonard.
Here.
Member Sonata. Here. Quorum is present.
All right, thank you. Okay, at this time, the public is invited at this time. Doesn't look like we have any public, but I'll read it anyway for the record. Yeah, the public is invited at this time to comment on and discuss any topic that is relevant to or within the authority of the Carson City Audit Committee. In order for members of the public to participate in a committee's consideration of an agenda item, the committee strongly encourages members of the public to comment on an agenda item during the item itself. No action may be taken on a matter raised under public comment unless the item has been specifically included on the agenda as an item upon which action may be taken. Okay, item number 4, adoption of the agenda. What I'd like to do is I would like to actually amend the...
Ask if there's public.
Oh, is there any public comment? Is there any public here? Okay. You know, the DA in the past always let me slide on that one, Mary, so. Okay. Item number 4, adoption of the agenda. I'd like to make an adjustment like this to change it, move items 6 and 7 before number 5. And so I guess there's a motion to make that.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Passed.
6 and 7.
Yeah, so we're going to do 6 and 7. So right now, we'll start with what's on our agenda list is item number 6, discussion, possible action, and direction of staff regarding the current audit work program update. I think at this time we'd like to introduce Mr. Storanka of Moss Adams. If you could please give us an update.
Sure. Good afternoon. Mark Storanka with Moss Adams, your internal auditor. So you should have in your packet our kind of standard, just a 2-page status report of each of the projects that are, excuse me, part of the current fiscal year audit program. And we'll obviously be talking about the internal controls report today, so I won't dwell on that. I really just wanted to give you an update on 2 of the projects. One is the strategic planning, and the other is the fraud, waste, and abuse program coordination. Regarding strategic planning, the draft strategic plan has been developed. We had a reasonable turnout at the open houses. The city had a reasonable turnout at the open houses. We got quite a strong response to the survey, which was great, and so got a lot of input. We actually added some goals and objectives to the strategic plan as a result of input from the public. So that was great. So that process was productive, which is awesome. I'm not exactly sure of the precise timing that the strategic plan is coming back to the board. Lori, do you happen to know timing? Nick, do you happen to know when it's anticipated the strategic plan is going back to the board?
It's probably going to be May 21st.
May 21st. Okay, thank you. And so that strategic plan includes goals, objectives, strategies, and performance measures tied to each of the goal areas. And so we were able to sort of make the connection, the alignment back to the initial effort on performance metrics commissioned by the audit committee. And so what I would anticipate is that plan will come back to you as the audit committee after the board adopts it, and as we talked about last time, versus the vice versa, the typical process where it comes to you first, because it's a not that these aren't all public documents, but a public-facing document that really should be approved by the board first. And so it sounds like that could maybe, I know we have to talk about when our next meeting would be, but let's just assume it's in June. It sounds like that would be good timing for the strategic plan to be able to be shared with the audit committee. Okay, any questions regarding strategic plan?
I do have a question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I missed the last meeting, so this may have been mentioned then, but I was wondering, our next step beyond the where the metrics development is or will be the cost to undertake and pay for the different performance measurement process? In other words, tying the strategic plan to the budget.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that I have a definitive answer to that yet. This is what I would anticipate. So the initial cut of the performance metrics that were done working with the city management and for the audit committee and board a year ago had a specific set of metrics by function within the city. I think there might have been like about 17 functions identified at that time. There are efficiency metrics, there are effectiveness metrics for each of those areas. And then what we had discussed at that time is the ideal sequence would have been strategic plan and then performance metrics. So we were sort of in the reverse order at that point, and that when the strategic plan was completed, we would revisit the performance measures and make sure that there were measures developed that were aligned with what the plan was seeking to accomplish, what the city is seeking to accomplish through the plan. So those have been identified. In the first case a year ago, we had the metrics, 3 years of historical data, so we could see what the trend line looked like. That would need to be done for these metrics. I don't know that it's necessarily something that the internal auditor needs to do. We could do, but I would just say that once, I think my suggestion would be is once the strategic plan is shared with the audit committee, to revisit the discussion of the metrics, what your expectations are relative to them, work with city management on a game plan for sort of what life those metrics will take on moving forward. For example, is it something, that's reported back on an annual basis, a semi-annual basis, a quarterly basis? How is the data collected? How is it reported? How is it shared with the audit committee in this case? And just sort of revisit it based on what's in the plan, and then also just thinking about the metrics that are in the plan are, by definition, at a higher level because they're tied to what the plan covers, which there are 6 goal areas. So there'll be fewer metrics in the plan, for example, versus what was in the initial set of metrics that were developed, because that was down at a functional level. And so part of your discussion could be, so we kind of have 2 sets. There'll be some commonality in them. Which set, if either, or of course it would be some of them, or both, are of interest to the audit committee. And so I think those are all sort of fertile territory for discussion, and we should just sort of have that discussion when you have that information and see where it takes you. And then we can see where we fit in, if any, of that moving forward.
So you're anticipating that work to tie it in with the budget would be a step or 2 further down the road?
Yes. So I think a safe answer to that is yes. And I think that would definitely be a collaborative process, Nancy, Nick, as how that were to look like.
Yeah.
So yes, discussion to come. Okay.
Any other comments or questions? Do you have any more on that? Or
Okay, and so then the other topic is the fraud, waste, and abuse training. And I just want to update you that a webinar is scheduled for April 30th at 10 a.m. It'll be a 1-hour webinar. One of our certified fraud examiners, one of our practice leaders in our firm, will be giving that webinar. Her name is Gina St. George. She's a senior manager like Kim in our firm, very experienced. That webinar will be recorded so that it will be able to be played at employees' sort of leisure anytime thereafter. That's how we do all our webinars. So we're doing it just part of our normal process within Moss Adams. So we'll host it, we'll put it on, we'll work with the city manager's office to get information out to the employee base on when it is and how to access it and all that good stuff. And then that will be accessible, again, by employees thereafter. We're building into it questions so that you can get, well, a couple things. If the city wants to provide CPE for it, they could. More importantly, we'll be able to track who participated. So if the city is wanting to track who has gone through the training in terms of the webinar, that information can be made available. I'm not sure the answer of tracking that information moving forward. I should have come here with that answer, but I can find out. So if an employee isn't able to there's no way all the employees are going to go through the webinar at 10 a.m. on April 30th, because they have other things to be doing too. So if employee XYZ decides to access the webinar at a subsequent date, are we able to capture that they did that? I need to check on that. Probably the answer is yes, but so anyway, that's the plan for the webinar. It'll be 1 hour. It will be similar, not as necessarily the exact same, to the initial fraud, waste, and abuse training Nancy Young gave however long ago, a year and a half ago, something like that, for senior management. I know some of the audit committee sat in on that. Questions?
Can there be an opportunity for the committee members to sit in and watch
Oh,
this?
yes. I'm assuming, well, for sure you'll get information on when it's going to happen, and I'm assuming that one or a few of you will do that, yeah.
Thank you.
So can I understand that the training for the employees that is envisioned, is that to teach them what fraud, waste, and abuse is? Is it to teach them to report it? What's the 1 hour of training actually aiming to do?
Great question. So I guess I would say multiple objectives. One is some general orientation and understanding and awareness of what fraud, waste, and abuse is, definitions thereof, different types of controls, preventative, detective, corrective controls, gaining understanding that internal control starts at the top of an organization. Management is an internal control, so starting with the board and senior management, and just how it fits into an overall equation for any organization, not necessarily specific to a city, although the board of supervisors plays the same role for the city as a board does for a corporation. And we'll have some information in there about, sort of what do you do when that arises. Even though we have not finalized yet, I don't know that we'll get into detail. We could, of what you do here. So, Nancy Paulson becomes aware of some waste activity. What does she do? I'm sure we'll cover general stuff. I don't know if we would say, she contacts Adriana on this type of situation or something, that specific. But we want to cover enough territory and not too much depth that it's overwhelming, to get the employee in a position to that they understand what fraud, waste, and abuse is. They'll get from it some understanding of how internal controls fit into the equation, the role that it plays, and what role they play in a fraud, waste, and abuse sort of initiative or program for the city. Is that?
A little bit. And then, so that I'm catching up here from stuff that you guys have done in the past, but there's also the hotline for, let's say, an individual out in the community notices something or whatever. Where is that? Does that database go to you as Moss Adams? Where's the initial contact on the fraud, waste, and abuse hotline?
Yeah, so two answers to your question. First, as it relates to your initial question, so we will talk about the hotline that exists and what role it plays, and specifically how that works is so that hotline is hosted by an external third party that the city contracts with to host it. those reports go to us as the internal auditor. So we receive, if there is a report of an incident, it'll come to us with the information that's provided as part of that report. And we have a policy and procedure document that was developed under the direction of the audit committee that sort of guides what to do. And if there's something that rises to the level of fraud, waste, of abuse, we'll pursue it. The majority of, which haven't been a lot, of reports that have come in through the hotline have been not risen to the level of fraud, waste, abuse. So something that we might refer to the city manager, some cases I've referred them to the sheriff, just to the appropriate party within, because they were clearly not fraud, waste, or abuse. Not only did they not rise to the level of it, they weren't relevant to fraud, waste, abuse. They were issues that someone had, and so they were routed to the appropriate parties, and that's how it works with the other cities that we do that. And we'll also get, not that this is critical, but I think it's each month we get a report just indicating how many incident reports there were. So we'll get, 0 for this month, et cetera. So, and then the one case, I believe there has just been one to date, which was relatively early on in the process setting it up. There's sort of a protocol for how we communicate with the audit committee. So these are public meetings, so we have to honor the confidentiality of those reports. But we would share that there was a report, that there's something that we're dealing with, or here's the nature of what we're dealing with, not specific enough to be able to identify, but to give you a sense, that type of thing. But it's there hasn't been a lot of activity, which is a good thing. Yeah. Okay.
If I could, I believe after that next step is we still have plans to go through public information. In other words, notify the public about the fraud, waste, and abuse program within the city. And hopefully that will follow sometime not too long after the first webinar.
Agreed. Anything else? That was it for my update. Thank you.
We're going to comment on the employee efficiency study, or just, I guess it's completed, there's nothing else on it?
It's completed, yeah, and it was completed, prior to the last meeting, so I'd taken it off the list.
Okay, on your agenda, we'll now go to number 7, and that's discussion and possible action regarding.
Is there any action we're needing to do on the prior one?
Is there
Current
any?
work progress?
No.
Is there any action? I don't see.
We were doing number 6?
Yeah,
It
number
says
6.
Possible action. Action to staff regarding current audit work program?
I don't think there's any action that's needed, is there, at this time?
No.
It's just a progress report.
It's just a progress report.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, on to number 7. Okay, discussion and possible action regarding having future audit committee meetings in the evenings. And somebody made the request that possibly it'd be better to have meetings, audit committee meetings in the evenings, so that the public is more able to, to accommodate the public who cannot come during the workday and come in the evening. So I guess we'll just leave it up for discussion. If anybody has any comments, and if we want to take action on that or not. Any comments on changing this to the evening?
I've got a couple. I think at this point we don't really have much information as to whether the public would be interested in attending. We don't get a lot of public input during our afternoon meetings, so it's always possible. One of the things I was wondering is would an evening meeting end up costing the city more money than an afternoon meeting? would they be looking, city employees be looking at overtime and so on that otherwise they wouldn't have to incur? Any, let's see,
yeah.
that was,
Yeah,
a couple others. But that was,
yeah, just to answer you on that one, I did talk to Nick Providenti on that, and he said that, like, the management, there wouldn't be any overtime for them, their managers, so there would be, so he said there'd be a slight cost, but it would be probably nothing that's, significant, yeah.
okay. And I guess obviously the committee will be, I guess, voting on something here, but my thought is it might be worthwhile for us to have one meeting sometime and see what kind of interest that draws, rather than change our process, have a test case. That was the only other thought I had. Thank you.
Just a quick comment. I belong to an association who never has meetings in the evening, so the people who would like to be there, I think, can't make it. So I think it would be very good to do an evening meeting.
And I'd kind of like to agree that I'm not sure that our committee would really generate that much public interest, but because the issue has been raised, it would probably be, I was thinking along the same lines, that it would be a good idea to, let's maybe schedule our next meeting or something in the evening and see if there really is public interest, and if there is, we can continue it, and if not, we can go back to this schedule, which I think works a little better for most of us.
Well, I certainly think that the reason that we're here is for the public. This board's role is to kind of be a public oversight, and so if there's an opportunity that more public would attend, I think we should try it. I mean, that's really our purpose and why we're here, so why don't we try 2 meetings, because maybe one meeting at night, they won't even recognize it's switched to the night yet. So why don't we try a couple and see if we get some audience participation, and give the opportunity, because that's what it's all about, is sharing the information with the public. So I'm okay with some night meetings.
Well, I tend to keep it in the afternoon, but I do see the wisdom in at least having the opportunity and seeing what happens. I don't think we've never really generated any public interest. I think, though, if there ever was a topic or something we were going to discussing that we felt was going to be very public, I think definitely we would want to probably move that into the evening. But yeah, I think maybe at least try the next meeting and do that in the evening. I just have one question, though, for Moss Adams. Does that create any hardship or problem for you guys?
No problem.
Good. All right, well, that's important.
And no extra cost.
And that's what I was really asking. Thank you. You read my mind. Okay, with that, do I hear a motion to, I guess the motion, do I hear a motion on this?
I'll move that the Carson City Audit Committee hold its next meeting at in the evening, 6 p.m., estimating a 2-hour.
How about 5:30?
Well, maybe we should, before I finish the motion, talk about time. And so who has a preference?
I think 5:30 would be.
Yeah, as soon as people get off work,
Yeah.
that's good. That's to be available. We don't want to keep it too late.
Okay. So I retract the prior motion and start again. And that I move that the Carson City Audit Committee hold its next meeting at 5:30 in the evening, and subsequent to that meeting, or at the end of the meeting, then we make a determination as to whether we would like to hold a second meeting in the evening.
Second.
Okay, is there any more discussion on that? Okay, if not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Okay, now we'll move over on to which is on our agenda, item number 5. A presentation by Moss Adams on the final report of the assessment of internal controls for the Audit Committee's consideration, discussion, and possible recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. The Board of Supervisors approved the assessment of internal controls at their June 5th, 2014 board meeting. Moss Adams will present their final report to the Audit Committee for discussion and possible recommendations to the Board of Supervisors. So I guess as we get into this whole topic of internal controls, it's important for us all to remember that internal controls really are the responsibility of management in the board and nobody else, and governmental accounting standards boards makes that clear. Even in the letters that auditors give, they have to outline that responsibility. So I'm really glad that we were moving in this direction and that we are helping the board to fulfill their duties and their responsibilities to get the information they're needing to and some good oversight for looking at the internal controls. And I hope that this is going to be a continuing process that from here on out we are going to be moving much more into internal controls now that we've made some headway with the performance measurements and we're getting that under our belt, and really focus on the controls for the city. So with that, Mr. Stranka, would you like to take it from there?
Sure. I'm just going to make a couple of introductory comments before I turn it over to Kim Cook. One historical comment and one sort of a current looking forward. So the historical comment is, this was one of the activities that we had recommended for going into this fiscal year's program because a couple-fold. One is internal controls really hadn't been a focus to date under the audit program. And as we work with councils, boards, and audit committees, we usually try to work with having a mix of activities in 3 different buckets: risks, internal controls, and performance. And in some cases, you have a relatively equal blend of those activities in any given year. For most of our clients, it sort of ebbs and flows. You have some focus on internal controls. Other years, you have more focus on performance-related activities. Here, we kind of started more on the performance focus and wanted to get this into the mix. So, it was kind of time to do it, and it's just a prudent, I think, as we talked about, it's foundational work, foundational information to work with, just like a risk assessment is. So that's sort of the historical. The current and future looking is, one is, unlike an external financial audit, a finding here isn't necessarily a bad thing. These are, as all of our work, just as in the performance audits or performance reviews, findings are opportunities to improve. And so the number of findings doesn't matter. You can have 3 really, really meaty, critical, end-of-the-world findings, and you can have many, small and medium ones, and everywhere in between. And so the number of findings doesn't matter. The findings aren't necessarily a bad thing, and these are opportunities to improve. And as Kim goes through this, you'll hear very little things, some things that are more substantive, and one other sort of context for them. And Carson City is very typical with the other cities that we work with in terms of the types of things we find relative to internal controls. And one theme here is to a decent extent, the findings are more about decentralized activities than they are versus centralized activities, and that's very common also. This report doesn't go through and identify all of the internal controls that are in place and everything that is good, which, it would be nice to spend as much time on that because, people would feel better. But it really is about where are their strengths and weaknesses, how do organizations operate that, for the most part, like most cities, are very highly decentralized. And where do you need things working out in the decentralized locations, and how should that work, and what things do you need to happen in a central sort of oversight, which is typically finance when we're talking about internal controls, but not exclusively, and then where things go, as the comments were made by the chair, up to senior management as a whole and board as a whole, and they all work together. And so Carson City is not out of the realm of reasonableness here in terms of our experience and what we encounter with other cities. And what I would encourage you to do is, as you usually do, is ask questions as Kim is going through the material. We'll do it sort of component by component and get a feel for what's in the report. Anyway, over to Kim.
Kim Cook, Moss Adams. Where does this show up?
Oh, Kathy, do you want to put this up? Sure. Sorry.
Just checking.
Yeah, the first few aren't critical.
Yeah, so just to give you, for the presentation, a few things I'll cover is just an introduction and explain our approach to doing this. Then I'm going to cover conclusions, which might seem odd, but we kind of want to present our concluding remarks and then go into the results of the different areas where there is findings and talk about next steps. So our approach was to look at key financial areas for the city, which includes payroll and timekeeping, looking at how pay rates are changed in the timekeeping process, purchasing and accounts payable, monthly account reconciliation and closing, which would be account reconciliations, cash reconciliations, the journal entry process, those sort of things. Cash receipts and cash handling, revenues and billing, accounts receivables and write-offs, grant management and compliance. And then we also look at information technology general controls, and we do that because all the financial information is coming from systems, and you want to make sure that you got the right controls in place for those systems to operate and produce accurate information. So I want to emphasize, this was just an assessment of internal controls. We didn't audit internal controls. What we were doing with this assessment is looking to see how the controls are designed, looking for an example to see that what people were telling us is actually what was implemented. We did not go as far as testing operating effectiveness, meaning we did not pull samples of transactions to test if the control was operating effectively. Typically, we see that as more like a second step if there was areas that we wanted to focus on more. And our work was conducted between November and January, and we met with over 25 employees to gather this information. So we met with centralized finance employees, but also in accounting and finance employees throughout the different departments. So how we complete these assessments is we determine what control objectives should be met by the city's internal controls, and then we interview people to figure out what controls they have in place to meet those control objectives. Once we've determined what those controls might be, that's when we're examining the processes and documentations around those key controls. We're performing walkthroughs where we're having people show us what they do, or we're observing the internal control. And that helps us get a good understanding of the controls in place. From there, we're deciding does that control meet the control objective, or is there a gap in place? If we determine there's a gap in place, that's where we've noted it in this report, and for each gap or issue that we've noted, we've provided a recommendation. So within the report, there's a table that has the control objectives, the issue related to that control objective. Then we have the likelihood of occurrence, which we've rated as low, moderate, or high, and that's the probability of a negative event occurring. We also have the impact of occurrence, which we've rated as low, moderate, or high, and that's the level of significance if the negative event occurs. So it could be a dollar impact, but there could be other types of impact too, such as risk to the city, legal risk, those sorts of things. And then we have the recommendation. So our overall conclusions are, as Mark mentioned, the report doesn't list all of the good internal controls we have in place, but there are many strong internal controls throughout the city. What this does mention is where we found issues, and so we see it as an opportunity to improve in several areas. And looking through the different control issues, if we were to summarize the overarching reasons for these issues, some of them would be lack of training. And it's not that the employees don't know how to do their jobs, but it's that they might not be trained to the overall policy and procedure in place, and that training hasn't disseminated out to the different departments. Insufficient policies and procedures. This is where there might not be a policy and procedure in place, so people are just doing it the way they think they should be doing it the best they can, when ideally you want to have a written policy and procedure to follow so that everyone is doing it the same way. Manual controls in place where there could be the opportunity for more automation, and then just some deficient processes. So this slide here summarizes our results by control area. We had 42 issues. The payroll, purchasing and accounts payable, revenue and cash collections, and IT general controls is where there was more control issues. And we typically do see more control issues, especially related to payroll, purchasing and accounts payable, and revenue and cash collections, because those are areas where there really is a lot of decentralization throughout the cities, and so you have a lot of people playing parts in these different parts of the process. So for each of the different areas, I was going to give a kind of an overview of some of the highlights of the findings in those areas, but if you have any specific questions on any specific finding, please let me know. For payroll, one of the things what I would comment on is the timekeeping is done by the departments, and a lot of times there's manual time cards, and so these time cards are approved, so there's definitely a review and approval process there, but getting that manual information into the HTE, the city's system, that's where there could be better documentation of the review that takes place to make sure that it's getting entered and accumulated properly.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So HTE, how long has the city been using that system?
Nancy Paulson, Deputy Finance Director. I believe it goes back to at least 1990.
So we've had it? Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Another area in payroll is with FLSA calculations. These are typically done outside of the system. They're manual calculations. They're complicated, and so having a good review process in place is important. Policy and procedure development and training of department personnel. There's things where it would be good to have department personnel who are doing the timekeeping or reviewing the time cards to have some training on what are the policies and procedures related to overtime, or what are the regulations that they need to follow, those sorts of items. And then deactivation of terminated employees can always be an issue, especially when you're using exception-based reporting. There's the risk that someone might not get terminated from the system timely and still get paid.
And I was just going to add here that this will be kind of a theme across when we talk about policies and procedures. So, the simple way of just thinking of that is if Nancy's not here tomorrow because she's won the lottery, not hit by a bus, how would her replacement or any employee's replacement know what to do? It's not sexy to develop policies and procedures. No one wants to do it. No one really has time to do it, right? But it's an important facet. All of our clients have opportunities to strengthen their policies and procedures, let's put it that way. And certainly coming off, that's always the case, but certainly coming off a period of a couple of economic downturns, those are the last things you're worrying about, right? You're trying to keep the lights on, and yes, we've had a few good years since the downturn, but that doesn't mean we've staffed back up. That doesn't mean we've got extra time to work on those things. So these types of, what we're sharing isn't out of the ordinary, but it is obviously good business practice to have a reasonable set of policies and procedures in place, and really just to think about, if I'm not here tomorrow, how does the next person step up and know what to do? And that's where a lot of these opportunities exist. And again, Carson City is no different than our others.
So for purchasing and accounts payable, some themes there. One is with purchasing cards, and we see throughout all cities and other organizations too, the use of purchasing cards is increasing, and that's because they're very efficient, and there's rebates and so we understand that. But with that, it's removing some of the controls that are usually in place up front to be more important after the fact, to have really strong monitoring controls. And the city does have processes in place to make sure that each P-card transaction does have a receipt, and they go through reconciliation processes for that. But we would recommend some additional monitoring procedures where there's really tracking of instances where people are not following purchasing card policies, where they're looking to see what are cumulative payments to a vendor, and should there be times where instead of using the P card, it should go through a purchase order. Looking to see the reasonable of price, because when you're using a P card, you're not getting competitive bidding. Those types of items. So some additional oversight and monitoring there. A couple other items to mention: segregation of duties. Accounts payable does have access to set up new vendors. Ideally, you want to have that segregated. If it's not segregated, you'll at least want to have good monitoring controls in place there. And then just overall, there could be some additional monitoring related to purchasing practices, making sure that the purchases are following the procurement policy, and if not, that there's a good enforcement system to make sure that, if a person should have used a purchase order, that they're being told they should, and they're using it next time.
I'd like to ask a question there too, and maybe even Nick can, Nick? I actually want to compliment the city on something, and maybe this dovetails into purchasing and AP findings, but Mr. Morano had presented to the Board of Supervisors to do some Kaizen trainings, and so I was fortunate one day when I was at the city office, they actually were doing a Kaizen event on purchasing and P cards, and I happened to step into that. So what I want to say is that I'm quite pleased that I saw the staff engaged in trying to make it better, that the opportunity of the Kaizen actually fits right into these findings. And so I'm pleased to see that the staff themselves already recognized that purchasing was one of the areas to address in a Kaizen event. So I think this audit actually dovetails what Mr. Morano was after when he said we have to start doing things differently in the city and looking for efficiencies and effectiveness while maintaining the integrity of the purchasing rules and procedures and state laws. So I want to tell you, I learned all about blue sticky notes and all these other things, but I really did enjoy seeing the process. And I'm very thrilled that the employees of Carson City themselves recognized that they have to do it a little bit differently. So I don't think there's a problem with the audit, only in that I ask that the group that worked on the Kaizen, that they get an opportunity to look at this, and when they do their finaling of any of those component pieces, that these can be addressed within that Kaizen event. So I just thought sorry to put you on the spot, Nick, but I was very thrilled to actually see that all come together, but make sure that those that work so hard on that Kaizen event and they're doing their little blue sticky pain points, that they recognize and address some of the pain points that might be in this report, and that it would be good for everyone.
For the record, Nick Morano, City Manager. Supervisor Bagwell, I want to thank you for those comments. It's been through the support of the board we've been able to actually implement that program. We'll certainly feed back into the Kaizen process these findings. We have a number of other Kaizen events coming up. There's going to be a big one on HR next week that touches just about every aspect of payroll, as any employee change, new hire, retirement, any change to any employee status obviously has a direct impact. The purchasing Kaizen event went extremely well, and a lot of the same folks who were in that event last week are going to be participating in the upcoming HR event. So we'll definitely feed these back into the process, and I think this is a great opportunity now that I have an opportunity to comment. We're embracing embracing this report, this internal audit report. It shows us the direction we need to go. I think it's been a long time coming in actually having that independent assessment. I want to thank Moss Adams for doing it. So it kind of gives us the direction we need to go, and we've got some work to do, but we're very pleased with where we are to date. We're going to get better. We're going to incorporate both new processes, new procedures. I want to have desktop procedures for all of these functions that we perform, so that if the proverbial lottery win, right? We used to say if you got hit by a bus, but I guess if you win the lottery, it's probably better. So, you know, in other words, any person can easily step into a job that someone else had to leave, maybe for family leave or something else, and be able to pick right up and know exactly what the procedures are, what's expected, so that the next time we do what I hope to be a much more in-depth, maybe we'll actually test some of these procedures, as was alluded to. We'll come out with a gold star. I mean, that's our objective here.
I really want to, again, thank you, and I just wanted to put that word out to those employees that were participating in their event, that they seriously want to do better. They recognize they're the city face, and that, you know, these reports can look poorly on the city, but I didn't see that in the employees. I saw them engaged and really wanting to do what was right. And so I just wanted to pass that on to the people that might be watching this, that our city employees care and they want to do a good job, and so you should be proud of the work that they were doing.
Thank you, ma'am.
Can I say something real quick? Sherry Russell, County Manager. I'm actually the head of that AP Kaizen event you guys are talking about. And it did go much better than I thought it would be. I thought there would be quite a bit of contention between the departments, what they do and what we do. But it was actually a lot of learning about what the departments do and what we do, and working together to figure out the best way to do it, but still maintain those controls. And actually, I want to say about 80% of what they found is already in our plans for implementation. So,
If I could make a comment, this is Bill Prowse, and I very much enjoyed hearing that. I've grown up and in my profession working toward desktop policies. But as we were going through this, I was thinking, how will that impact our report, and where should we go from here? And we can accept or not this particular report, but I think we need to incorporate the Kaizen concept and process within any subsequent reports we do on this, any subsequent reviews that we follow on from our audit, because this, as we said, was not an audit. It's a overview and trying to look at areas that would benefit from a multiple different kinds of revisions to operations. One of those being an audit, which is more expensive and more detailed. But as I look through this, there are several areas that I think could benefit from an audit. But before we make those decisions, which maybe in June, maybe we could incorporate what happened with the Kaizen study and relative to our analysis of potential future audits. And so work with it is my thought. Thank you.
Agreed, certainly on that. And I'll kind of make two comments. One is, and it is kind of interesting because in reality, you know, some of the findings in the internal controls review are reflective of being short on resources. And what process improvement does, like a Kaizen event, is it teaches you how to do things more efficiently. And so one is almost in one way countering the other, which is great. And I will just make a plug for Carson City. As a firm, we do a lot of process improvement. Carson City is for sure the exception to the norm in terms of using these techniques within city government. And there are a few out there that do, but it's not more than a couple handfuls, and I'm talking, at least throughout the Western U.S. And so it is really good to be doing. When we speak at events, which I often do, this isn't a plug for us, but a plug for city. We'll want to talk about that Carson City is doing these things because taking an AP process, for example, and really redoing that, there's, as the city manager want to do, there's no reason you can't do something, re-engineer an AP process like you can re-engineer a manufacturing process, right? And so in this regard, I'd say Carson City is not only a good thing, but Carson City is a leader in what they're doing. So.
For grants management, with grants, they're operated by the departments that have the grants, and there's very different types of programs that these different grants do, so it really varies from department to department. But we still think there could be some better oversight and monitoring centrally related to grants, just tracking what the changes are to the compliance requirements. An example is the Uniform Grant Guidance was issued, came out back in, I'm getting my years mixed up, the beginning of 2014, and it's effective now. And so that's a big change that the city needs to evaluate and make sure that that information is disseminated and that the people operating the grants are aware of the changes. So some examples like that, where there could be some increased monitoring, training, and policy and procedure development.
Question on that section? Michael? No. Can I ask this?
Yeah, sure.
So, Kim, potentially in the grants management findings arena, do you think that Carson City handles it different than other entities that you work with because we don't have a single point on our grants?
No,
we're so decentralized.
Right. No, it's very typical for grants to be decentralized, and the benefit of them being decentralized is the program personnel are working with kind of the financial personnel within the department, so they all understand the inner workings of the grant. So I see that as the benefit of decentralization. I would say no matter what, there could be what we typically see as the opportunity for a little bit more central oversight, and we put here like the need for a dedicated grants coordinator. That would be a good way to go, but another way to do that would just be to increase the interaction of the grants personnel in the departments, where there's a standing monthly meeting that also includes accounting, and they get together and they talk about what are they seeing of changes and requirements, how could things operate better, because a lot of the transactions still go through accounting and finance and that sort of thing.
So I guess for me, grants management is the arena that the external audit that the city has received year after year after year continues to be, and probably for all governmental entities. I will disclose I used to receive all the audits for those, and it tends to be where the non-compliant areas come. And so my question, if grants was not, maybe that's one we dive into a little further to help eliminate those external findings that we get and then get reported up to your granting agency that says, okay, Carson City made an error on blah, 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 blah. And it's a standard response that we answer on every grant. Okay, we'll do better.
Right.
Well, but we keep having those.
Yeah.
So one of the recommendations we might want to look at is what can we do to eliminate that finding that we continue to have. So I don't know if you're going to dive deeper into one of the Kaizen events, but I'm interested in the city eliminating those from our external audit compliance arena. And so that might be a Kaizen event or something we could work on. And again, I think it's very common, but what can we do? Is there really some meaty thing we could work on?
Again, for the record, Nick Morano, city manager. This has come up in previous studies. I think it was on the efficiency study, and I think it's also been flagged by the external auditor, although I can't remember if it did or not. I think at one time the city had a grants coordinator. I don't know I don't know when that position, if the city had that, it was eliminated. I've got that one for action. We've got a lot of competing requirements in terms of where we need to put people, but this one could make us some money. And I'm looking who else could possibly pick up and perform some of these functions. But this is an important one, and this could actually make us some money.
And I was just going to say, I think that's a great point. And so first, as Kim said, it doesn't have to be a position, right? And so there's more than one way to get at it. It's more about the collaboration across the city and best practices and all that. The external audits, A133 audits, yeah, it's common to get those, and often those are little ticky-tack things which, it's a finding, but in the grand scheme of things, it's nothing, so to speak. However, it's really what the city manager mentioned. I would say the greater opportunity relative to grants is more revenue, revenue recovery, making sure that you're maximizing your allocations and your indirects and getting the most out of those activities that you can across the city. It's really it's like a business opportunity. Yes, there can be controls and risk opportunities, but it's a business opportunity also, and that's almost more what I would be interested in seeing for the city is being able to get more out of that activity for the city as a whole. And because they're overwhelmingly decentralized, they're often not at critical mass in terms of doing all that they could for the organization. So anyway. Yeah.
And going along with that, applications that should, like someone saying, oh, why aren't we applying for this one, looking at it more holistically. So
right.
Actually, yeah, generating additional grants. So
I could make a brief comment. Over my years as federal auditor, I did audit some grants, and generally the financial side of the grants, unless there was a total mess, the financial side was pretty good. The operational side when we were asked to go in and look, those are where the problems were. That's where the real money is to mess up. The idea behind coordinated oversight helps a lot to monitor how well our grant is achieving what we'd asked it to get it for in the first place is really important. And I think that applies also to grants that the Carson City issues directly on its own. There's $350,000 are out there that may not have the oversight it should have. So I'd like the idea of a grants oversight, whether it's a person or just a group, but that we take a look and incorporate operations and monitoring on production of the grant and benefits to the public. Thank you.
And with the new uniform grant guidance too, the federal government is going to be emphasizing more that the grants are actually performing, that it's not just that they've spent the money and they're requesting reimbursement. So I think that's something we're going to see changing over time, where they're more interested too in that the actual performance is being obtained. Okay, so revenue and cash collections. The theme here is that there's a lot of different departments throughout the city and locations throughout the city that handle cash, record revenue, and that's the areas where we see that there can be stronger internal controls. And it's not, with these findings, we're not saying that every location has these, but during our assessment, we found certain locations where they didn't have as strong of cash collection controls that they should. So some examples would be where they've collected cash, but they're not depositing it for a certain period of time, rather than best practices would be to get that to the bank daily. Areas where they're collecting the cash and they also can record adjustments. Let's see, where there's sharing of tills, or there's cash that maybe is not being kept in a safe. Things like that in different locations and departments throughout the city, where some cash handling training would be a good thing, and some site visits to these locations to really make sure they understand what internal controls controls should be in place. And if it's not possible to implement a control, that then the city's aware of what that is, and they're making a determination that, in this instance, it doesn't make sense to have 2 cash tills. So those were kind of the overarching themes with revenue and cash collections.
Hopefully we're just doing this section by section.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Sorry if that wasn't the intent. Okay. So when I read through the review of the internal controls, I think certainly the area that appeared to me to be the greatest opportunity for us to maybe concentrate on would be in the revenue and cash collections. And certainly, I don't care what organization, governmental, business, all of your most vulnerable point of contact is cash. And so am I correct when I read through this that might be one of the areas we want to embrace the quickest? Like, I think I read in there that we don't have any receipting methodology when we're out at the concession stands for the parks, and that's where a huge amount of cash is actually flowing. And there's no receipt, everybody's sharing the till. So is this the area that if we were going to work on that we really ought to concentrate on maybe as a place to
because it's cash, I would say it's the most susceptible to just cash being taken. And I think there's some of these specific findings that there's a quick fix to them too. Like it's a matter of making sure that there's a safe or a place to keep locked cash, or that there's a process to make sure stuff gets deposited daily. So yeah.
Well, or even something, that I did something earlier today that I was working on, and is anybody analyzing that it appears the cash is appropriate based on the inventory that was sold and paid for? And so I think one of the issues that we also might want to look at, do we believe there's truly an issue occurring? Because when you look at the inventory versus the cash, the margin's 25%. And if it's 25 to 30%, then the cash appears appropriate versus, how can we have a 50% inventory control item? And so I'm wondering if there's some help, potentially as we move forward, that you guys saw that you could help the staff with some of the analytical pieces as you're compensating control. Because I don't think, like you said, we're going to hire a second person to go to the park so that he can watch the person taking the cash. But that we could put in a compensating control, and that maybe you could make some recommendations that would be, like you said, quick fixes to some of these actions.
Yes, definitely. Like added reconciliations or mitigating controls when there's not the opportunity to, we do that.
We may want to hire the second person depending on the amount of cash that's involved. Yes. It's so fungible, and when you hear of the big money amounts that disappear, in some of these dealies, that may be well worthwhile to do.
My question was going to be, how much, real cash is the city really handling compared to total revenues? Because we don't want to, cash is vulnerable, no question about it, but you can spend more money trying to, not lose a penny than it's really worth. And I like the idea of your analytics, Lori.
So I guess part of it, some of the things that I'm learning, getting into the job, I did a ride along and watch some things. So I think you have a lot of cash particular to certain groups, not to the overall answer in the city. So cash is small as a percentage, but it's large in certain areas. So certain types of bail inside of the sheriff's office, cash, and they're big ones like 3,000, 5,000. That there's a lot of you're not getting out if you've been violated, and then you got to pay that kind, and it has to be a cash bond. I think that Parks and Rec does a lot of cash. And so I think it's going to depend on the department, but overall to the city, my belief is cash is small percentage, but large in some departments. So you might have an individual employee in so a concession event out at the ballpark, again, they might be an individual handling $10,000 of cash in one day. So it might be a large event. So.
And I just want to make, if I could just follow up on the comment about embezzlements. In my experience, the embezzlements usually happen because you have one person that is in charge of collections and the books. And these people write themselves checks. I mean, this is the way the $60,000 disappeared from the state, or the $80,000 from the Galena High bookkeeper's office. These people wrote themselves checks, and they knew enough to just stick those checks in with a stack, and the person signing them wasn't looking at every check. They're just, get it done. And that's the way most of the big embezzlements that I've seen happen, is people actually write themselves checks. They don't steal cash.
If I could add another aspect to this is public relations, public information issue. It's I think our citizens expect our government to maintain control over the money, the city's assets. And so there is a benefit of doing this just above and beyond trying to track cash, whether or not it's big or small.
Yes, it's the appearance of what sort of controls we have out there to make sure that some of that money doesn't disappear. And yeah, it is a problem when someone's collecting the cash and making all the entries and no one else checks anything. It's like the mention of receipts in here. How do you know how much they took in?
For policies and procedures and training, we've kind of covered this throughout, but just having citywide policies and procedures, and then departmental procedures and keeping them updated. And then internal control training too. And then with IT general controls, some themes here, and I think some of it comes down to having the resources to do it, but there could be stronger web filtering, review of audit logs, installation of an intrusion detection system, testing the disaster recovery plan. So there is one in place, but making sure that if something did happen, people know how it works and that it would work, and making sure the termination of employees of system access. It's not for the centralized systems, but there's systems that are also owned by departments, and making sure they're getting that information so that employees are terminated timely and don't have access to those systems. And then just with IT purchases, making sure that IT's approving those purchases, because a lot of times what's being purchased may not be compatible with the current systems, or they might already have something in place, and so making sure that IT purchases are looked at by IT.
And did we see that the issue in the IT again dovetails to the purchasing cards, because they're buying it, and that way we don't get the price break that we had with the contract that said if you buy from over here, we get it for $20 a keyboard, and you just paid $30.
Right, like that kind of stuff could happen. Okay. So making sure that IT, it's being tracked of what should be approved by IT, and then also that especially things with a PO and stuff like that, that they're routed at the beginning of the process through IT. So. Next.
Can I have one more question on
definitely.
the IT? One of your recommendations was the installation of an intrusion detection system. What is the city doing in that regard? I mean, how vulnerable are the city's computers to these major intrusions that we've been seeing throughout the...
Yeah, I mean, if they don't have one, then they're susceptible to malicious activity.
And we don't have anything that we're doing in that regard?
That's my understanding, but I also didn't have that direct conversation with IT, so I don't want to say that for certain, but that's... So next steps. Within our report, we broke out these different findings by things that could be remediated pretty easily. Some items that would take a longer time to implement, which findings really focus on training and which are documentation of policies and procedures, and then some areas where there could be future internal audit work. And so that's, I feel like, is a good way to look at how things should be remediated versus just taking all 42 issues and thinking, oh, where do we start? This kind of breaks it down into more specific areas on how to tackle these. And ideally, the controls would be remediated over the next 12 to 24 months with some prioritization by the city of where they should focus first. So. Any questions?
I have a question. Are we going to discuss P cards?
I guess at this time, is that pretty much conclude your conclusion? So I guess right now we've all probably had a chance to take a look at the report, and there might be some questions we have. I guess I'm kind of thinking that the purpose of a lot of this report is really to help us with future audit plans and where to go, and I think really next year. So I don't know we need to spend too much time. There might be some questions and concerns, but I think a lot of that we're going to use out of this, probably especially in the areas where it says where we have high ratings. We probably want to deal with those. The P cards, I share the concern about that, and even though it was high, moderate, might want to take a look at that. And so anyways, I kind of look forward. If there's any questions now, I guess I'd like to open it up just to discuss any particular items, but we could be here for hours going through this, so I just recognize that we'll kind of hit some of the key things, and we'll probably be using a lot of this for the future audit plans. So yeah, anybody have any comments at this time?
Yes. When I looked through this thing, the purchasing P card dealie sort of jumped out as one of the top items in this audit. And the reason for that is, I guess I'm not experienced enough in decentralization lately, but who are these 230 people that have these cards? And they spent $6.5 million. I assume that they all had purchase orders, but this to me looks really, really loose. And what happens if they violate the rules? Do these cards get picked up? I don't know. I'm just curious.
Nancy Paulson, Deputy Finance Director. We have several employees at different levels that have P cards. A lot of it's for travel, individuals doing the purchasing for each department, and actually we feel that we've had very little problems with the P cards. They go through the same review process as the accounts payable checks. Reports are ran time to time to look at the vendors and see if anyone's going over amounts that would require going out to bid or Board of Supervisor approval. I forgot the last part of the question.
Yeah, no, if I could also jump on that, because when I was working for the federal government in the early 90s when we transitioned to a similar system, the controls that the credit card or the P card system gives you are much greater than the previous manual systems, because you get a printout directly from the bank for each person, each card holder, all the items. It's easy to reconcile, and it's easy going through it to find out any type of suspicious or non-appropriate purchases. They're all reviewed by supervisors. For example, I review and I sign all the P card invoices of all the department directors. I go through each one of them, and I know each one of the other supervisors is doing the same thing, meaning I go through each line item of what they purchased that month on their P card. In addition, the city gets a rebate. Off the top of my head last year, you may know, Nancy, I think it was in the neighborhood of about $70,000 or $80,000 through the purchase of the more we purchase, we get some cash back on it. Does that number sound about right to you on the rebate?
Yeah, I think it's actually climbing to about 95,000.
About 90? Okay, yeah.
And
so a couple of I think there's some real benefits to the program. and I think the controls are actually better.
And actually, there have been consequences on cards that are used for inappropriate purchases. There's been disciplinary actions taken from low-level to higher-level employees, so we do take it seriously if they're not following the policies.
Yeah, I guess what struck me was I used to argue against company credit cards because I saw some really, really strange abuses of those things. And, okay, thank you very much.
I guess in the P-card arena, the only thing that really struck me is the number of issued P-cards against the number of full-time employees that we have. So I'm not saying that it's wrong, but I would just caution that we should be reviewing how many P-cards we're issuing, because again, it's an exposure opportunity. It doesn't mean anyone's doing anything wrong, but the more P-cards you have out there, the purchase will happen. And yes, you take punitive action on the back end, but if you had an employee go put a $5,000 charge on a P-card and he resigns before you even get the bill, the city's on the hook for the $5,000 because the purchase was made. And so my sole caution is to ensure that we don't have too many of them issued to reduce the risk. Again, I think they serve a purpose, and the rebates, and I think you're doing a great job on the review. I just want to make sure we don't have too many cards out there with the opportunity to have, again, someone disgruntled, they only have 2 weeks left of employment. When they give notice, do you get the P card back right away? Those types of things that, training, and that's really a training issue too, that if someone gives notice, get their P card. But I mean, you probably already do that too. I don't know.
We've actually had a couple departments go through and look at the list of employees that had P cards and have, reduced the number of employees. They run into trouble when, someone may be traveling. They don't travel very often, and so, there may be only a few transactions for some, half of the employees. So.
Based on the comments in here, it sounded like one of the concerns was the whether other purchasing policies and procedures were used or avoided if they use the P card. So it's not the P card transaction necessarily, but are those transactions going through the same internal control process that non-P card transactions, or something equivalent?
And we've actually addressed those issues, and are, like I said, going through printouts and looking at the, how much they've spent per vendor. And at the beginning of the year, we've gone through with IT makes a lot of purchases, and we went through with them and did several contracts just to, so that it went before the board.
So the Department of Finance then reviews all P card transactions?
Correct, about 3 people in finance reviewed the P card transactions.
A lot of work.
Well, I think that's that's going to probably be part of next year's audit plan, to just audit and take a look at that, so we kind of get some, really look at specific transactions and see, how that's working out. So I think we all have a lot of questions about that. We see there's a potential risk there, and I think that's for that reason we'll probably want to have that as part of our part of the audit plan next year.
I think that cash controls and P cards are probably the 2 areas of concentration, and I think that the cash control will probably be relatively easy for the city to address. Like you said, I think putting safes or procedures in for daily deposits or things won't be difficult implementation. There'll just be some adjustments that they make and some procedures. So I consider that probably low-hanging fruit that the city could address and take care of. And like you said, I think P cards might be an area to address. And I will say, in the Kaizen event, the employees admitted that the P card is the area in which they can, and not on purpose, again, I think they were learning and saying, oh my gosh, what do you mean? Well, you're violating a rule if you buy something over $5,000 because you didn't purchase properly. And I think it really went to the training that the employees go, but we're supposed to put everything on the P card because we get a rebate. We're saving the taxpayers money. I know, but there's another rule that says you can't do that. So I think P cards, and I think the employees are almost ready to embrace that anyway from what I got in the meetings. So I think that might be an area that we can all work together to do better.
Sherry Russell, Accounting Manager. I agree. 2 years ago, we implemented a new purchasing system, and that really brought to light a lot of the issues with the P cards as well as the POs, and training the employees on when they need to get a PO. So I think they've gotten a lot better in the last couple years because we've really cracked down on it in finance, but there's always room for improvement. So.
Just to comment on cash, I think the use of surprise audits is extremely important because those cash boxes, I had a gal who liked to invade the cash box on Friday night for the weekend and put it back on Monday morning, and it wasn't there one Monday morning. But I think that's a good way to audit what's going on without, a big effort on internal audit. Go to an event and see if 2 people are there or not, and I think that works very well.
I think another opportunity the city might want to look at on big cash that I ever did is you switch the employee. So let's say Johnny's been doing the rodeo event for the last 10 years and he's always the Saturday guy, and you look at his receipts and they're pretty consistent for 10 years. One of the simplest things you can do is say, oh, guess what, Megan, it's your turn to go do the rodeo on Saturday, and you see what Megan's receipts are. So I think there's some simple things we could do that doesn't have to cost us any more money, but just, guess what? Someone else is going to take the cash on that event this day, and let's find out.
But Megan might be very unhappy.
There you go. But if it goes down, then we know Megan was the problem. Okay. But again, there is some compensating things we could do without costing the city a lot of money, and we get a reasonableness for the taxpayer that we're safeguarding the cash.
Well, and one of the other comments here about public visibility of these things that internal audit might be doing, this could be a real good one, I think.
Okay, well, are there any more comments on that? Otherwise, we'll move on to the next agenda item. It's my understanding that, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Stranka, but I guess in our next meeting, we're going to come up with some kind of proposals or suggestions based on this risk assessment as to where you would recommend we probably focus our budget on internal audit, correct?
Correct.
Do we make a recommendation that this audit
Audit.
Okay. Yep.
We were both saying.
Yeah. Make a recommendation. Let's see. Oh, yeah, just basically make a recommendation to accept this report and to recommend to the board. So do I have a motion to accept the report and make that recommendation to the board?
I'll move this, Bill Prowse. I'll move that we accept this report and send it to the Board of Supervisors.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Okay, moving on to our last agenda item. Scheduling our next meeting. I guess before we make a plan on that, I guess we want to make sure that we have enough to discuss and we're ready. I believe we're needing to take a look at what the plan would be, what Moss Adams' recommendations would be for us next year. I think we'll probably discuss in that next meeting the mix of our budget. We've been, as I mentioned earlier, we've been focusing a lot on performance for the last few years, and I think we're now going to, now that we're getting that under our belt, and that's in a sense stabilizing, and it's ready for the long term, getting us information and giving us feedback, moving more into the internal controls. So that'll probably be part of what we talk about in the future. When do you think Moss Adams will be ready to give us a report on the performance as well as to audit plans as far as next year?
Well, a couple thoughts. So, one, assuming we present this report to the board, so the internal controls review. I know one of the board meetings is June 4th, and if that happened to work, to present this report to the board on the 4th, we could either meet with the audit committee on the 4th potentially, or on the 3rd, especially if we're doing an evening meeting here and a morning meeting on the board the next day. We would certainly be prepared to bring the items, Mr. Chair, that you referenced in that type of time frame, and I think that would be good timing generally coming towards the end of the fiscal year. It's just a matter of whether those dates would work for the audit committee and whether that would be appropriate timing to present the internal controls review to the board. So, questions to...
I'm thinking,
Okay.
well, probably since the Board of Supervisors will be in session all day, that maybe probably better if we went for the 3rd on Wednesday. That doesn't work?
It's backwards. You need to know that the Board of Supervisors is accepting this in the plan.
Okay, that's right, we got to go afterwards. Okay, so we'd have to, okay, gotcha. Yeah, all right, so we can't do the 3rd then, we'd have to do the 4th.
I'll suffer, is what you mean.
Well, if I
It'll
might
be a
just-
long day, yeah.
Well, if I might just ask, so what do we need from the board necessarily to have a discussion in terms of what the audit committee's program would be for the next fiscal year?
Well, if we were to recommend as the audit committee on the 3rd our plan of action, and the Board of Supervisors does, I'm assuming your plan of action, let me say that differently, will include the audit that we just did here, but if the board's not inclined to that area, then we'll be making recommendations that don't fit. I can't imagine them not, but that...
Yeah, I guess theoretically I agree, but from a practical standpoint, I'm not sure that I have that
Are you
concern.
wanting to incorporate, though, any of the items from the evening of the 3rd onto that 4th agenda?
No, definitely not. So we would come back, so let's set aside the internal controls review. So that needs to go to the board, but that's, I was just trying to piggyback sort of the dates. What needs to happen in terms of moving from this fiscal year to the next fiscal year in terms of the audit plan are for the audit committee to come up with recommendations for the FY 15-16 audit program, agree on that, recommend it to the board reviews and votes on that. That would happen after the 4th, for sure, because that would have to go into a package and all that. So I don't, yes, the board might say, what the hell are you thinking with this internal controls or something, but I doubt it, and even if they didn't accept the report for some reason, I don't know that wouldn't even necessarily change what the audit committee would recommend for a program. I mean, it could, but highly unlikely. So we're certainly happy to meet on the 4th, but I don't think, I'm not sure that you need to use that as a limiting factor if the 3rd is better for the audit committee. That's all I'm saying.
I've got a question relative to the budget, though. Shouldn't we make a recommendation to the board relative to the budget for the internal audit program in FY15?
It's going to come next.
It's too late. But that would be too late. I'm just letting you know that that's too late, which is what I was trying to relate here is, and maybe that's a future, did we have that on here? We could talk about future agenda items? I'll do that just as public comment. Just in general public comment is that we look at the audit schedule in the future as to timing to be able to get to the Board of Supervisors for any action. So that's just a general comment that I'm making, because it seems to me, watching all of this, that some of our processes are a little bit backwards than what I'm used to doing when you get an audit, and then how does the management respond to the audit, and maybe we just want to look at the whole processing methodologies and make sure we have all of that on the right page. So that's just a general comment under the just public comment stuff.
And these items relate to what maybe occurred during that meeting on the 3rd or 4th, correct? Because one of the issues I'm interested in is the comprehensive annual financial report and the audit committee's responsibility to evaluate that. And that I would like to see on the next agenda also.
Yeah, I agree. So I guess what we need to do at this point is come up with a date when we meet again. Is the 3rd acceptable for everybody? And the next one's going to be in the evening, so at 5:30 on the 3rd. Does that work for everybody? I think that's Wednesday. Yeah, Wednesday. Okay. Okay, we're going to set that up for Wednesday the 3rd. And okay, so are there any other?
I was just going to, I guess, comment or ask Supervisor Bagwell, in terms of the budget, it's been this committee's historical practice, thank you, to stick with the same budget that has been in the prior year, which has been $110,000. I know Nick Providenti has historically just programmed that. And I just wanted to get back to your comment about timing of the budget. I mean, I'm assuming if it's not in the budget now, it's already too late. No? No?
Well, not in my book, no. I mean, we're going to have a public hearing May 7th for one piece, and then May 23rd, the formal adoption meeting. So in my personal opinion, I think it's when things should happen is on May 7th, that people bring their proposals on what should change or should it be the same. And that's what I meant by, if you were looking to be doing more activity or less activity, that waiting till June isn't the right answer, that this committee should be looking in March where it wants to go, so that the city staff has time to consider the recommendation in the first place. So I agree, you've probably just been rolled over at 110, but what's sad is none of you even know that. You don't know what the recommendation is, but neither do I. So I assume that it's still in there, but I don't know it.
We've just been spoiled by Nick, but maybe
there
Nancy
you go.
can comment.
I took it away. No. We did build the $110,000 into fiscal 16's budget.
I think, too, for this year, too, we were really waiting until we had a chance to go through this internal control to really determine what the plan would look like next year. So we were kind of bumped up against it. But it's good to know, like the Supervisor Bagwell mentioned, that maybe for next year we need to make sure that we have done the things we're needing to done so we can make those decisions a little earlier, probably by, I guess, I'm saying more like in April, March and April. That way we can be looking forward so that we're in a better position. Okay, well then, I guess we're looking at the next meeting being on what is that, the 3rd? Did we say
June 3rd.
June the 3rd? Okay, at 5:30. And with that,
Make a motion because it's an action item. So
do you need to make a motion? I didn't think we had to make a motion on that. Do we need to make a motion on that?
It's cleaner if she would.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do I have a motion?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that our next meeting is June 3rd at 5:30.
Do we need to check availability of the room?
It's available, right? Because Monday and Tuesday I'm here also at 5:30. So this will be a 4-day week for me. No, it's okay. Is it? Maybe Kathy knows.
Typically what we do is we set that up, and if there's a problem with it, they get back to us. Yeah, so that's what we do. So do I have a second on that?
Second. I'll second.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that motion passes. Then at this time, is there any public public comment. There's no public, so, but to be cleaner, I will say that the public's invited this time to comment on any matter that is not specifically included in the agenda as an action item. No action may be taken on a matter raised under the item of this agenda. Any public? No public. Now I'd like, is there a motion to adjourn?
From me for adjournment.
Second. I don't think it is.
All those in favor? Aye. Meeting adjourned.